Well, good morning, Tammy, or actually, I think it's almost afternoon for you. You are in Florida. I am just so happy that you are on this show with me today. We've talked a couple of times over social media and on the phone, and we met on Instagram, which is, seems to be par for the course here, with us breast cancer, uh, survivors and supporters and coaches and things like that. And I'm just super thrilled that you're here to share your expertise and your coaching. How are you doing today?
Jamie, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I am just so thrilled to be here. I'm doing great. I'm super excited for you and I to have this conversation, and especially right in the midst of October, Breast Cancer Awareness Month. Right? It's just so critically important that we just try to get as much information to women and men year round. But most importantly, October is when people are really trying to focus and pay attention to new things. So thank you so much for having me.
Right. And thank you so much for bringing in men because men are forgotten. And I don't forget about them now just because I know two men who have had breast cancer. And at the time that I found out, I was like blown away. I'm like, really? It's like, but it
Mhm.
makes sense, right? I mean, they have breasts. And so thank you for bringing that in. And I like hearing more and more people mention men lately, um, and so I know that you and I talked about, you're a coach for breast cancer patients and you've never had breast cancer, but you are in this very unique position that has led you to help educate breast cancer patients and their physicians. I'd love for you to share with us what led you to your special interest in advocating, educating, and coaching breast cancer patients.
Yeah, you know what, Jamie, I've just felt recently that there's just been this big nudge in my heart, to say this is something that you need to do. And when I think about where I've been in my career, so I'm dating myself by saying that I've been in the breast cancer space, both on the clinical side and on the industry side, for about 25, almost 30 years. Um, I started in the early days on the clinical side. My area of expertise there is women's imaging. So, as a mammographer, an ultrasonographer, working with breast surgeons and radiologist on the clinical side of things for many years, and then transitioned to industry. In industry, meaning I worked for medical device companies and diagnostic companies for many years in the breast cancer space, teaching doctors how to use new equipment, educating them on new technologies, reviewing new data when new tests are kind of coming to the forefront. It's interesting going back to 1995, back in the day, surgeons, the only option for women with an abnormality in their breast was an open excisional biopsy. I was part of that early team that helped to bring needle core biopsy to the market. And this is back in 1995 when folks thought, oh, that's never going to happen. How can we use a needle to pull tissue out, right? And to see something in its very early infancy stages go to standard of care, that's my area of expertise, and that's where I get really excited. Also, and that's where my experience with surgeons and radiologists. And then when I moved over onto the diagnostic side, and diagnostic side meaning genomic tests, I worked with companies where it's all about understanding tumor biology. So I would have really deep conversations with medical oncologists, talking about a test that can help identify or answer the question, does this patient really need chemotherapy? Can she safely forego chemo? So I called it the chemo no chemo test. And then there's a test for early stage breast cancer for DCIS. And I worked closely with this company, and the focus was radiation. Does this patient diagnosed with DCIS, can she safely forego radiation? So there are genomic tests out there that are still not used by every physician. And when I look at just my journey on the professional side, I saw a tremendous gap, Jamie. I saw a big gap in the fact that women just really didn't know. They didn't really understand what their diagnosis meant and what their true options were. And when we look at all of the data that's evolved over the years, it's very clear that breast cancer is not a cookie cutter process.
Mhm.
You and I can have the same pathology, but it all comes down to tumor biology and what biomarkers are driving that cancer. And that really would dictate the best course of treatment for that particular patient. I started Breast Cancer Coach. And April is really when I started, the gas pedal was on, right? Okay, this is what I'm going to do. I left the industry side. I felt that this nudge that kept telling me, you know how you get that little voice that says, take your experience, take your knowledge, and serve. And I said to myself, right? And I
Yep.
said to myself, my kids are grown. I'm an empty nester. They're married. Okay, it's time to focus on me and where my passion is. And if I can do this and not put myself in a bind, let's just give it all you got. And that's where I am right now because I am dedicating all of my time to Breast Cancer Coach, getting the LLC, getting the logo, getting a HIPAA compliant platform on the website, all of these things that were really important to me to really help to lift this small business off the ground. But the most important thing and my mission is empowering women with education
Mhm.
to help them, to help guide them to making a well-informed treatment decision. And so that's where I'm at. And, when I go on social media and when you go in the search bar, breast cancer, and you see all of these support groups, Jamie, it's heart wrenching when I read some of these posts that they're terrified. They're terrified. They get a diagnosis from their radiologist after a core biopsy, but they can't see a surgeon for 3 weeks. And that waiting time it's almost debilitating, right? And that's where I say, I can help you. I can help you where we would review your pathology, your imaging. And you know what, Jamie, I say this, let me just talk you off the ledge. Let me just help you understand what this means, because really, 9 times out of 10, it's not as bad as you think it's going to be, because there are so many really good treatment options available to women today. And women just aren't, they're not, well, let me just say there's a lot of really great options in all scopes, the early stage and the late stage. There's a woman that I was chatting with that's had metastatic disease and thriving for 11 years. So when I see so many women with small children and they're terrified and they think that, I've got to get my affairs in order. Okay, well, let's really talk about what this means. Because, yeah, life is going to suck, it's going to be hard, but you're going to be okay. You're going to get through this. And let's figure out the best course of treatment for you and what is the best surgical options for you.
It's really interesting that you bring up, this massive fear that we go through when we are diagnosed. That was me, 100%. And my head was all over the place. My audience knows that I had just retired from the school district, literally had a party 1 week before I was diagnosed, and my whole entire life just tumbled. And I was so scared. And when you talk about talking me off the ledge, my surgeon talked me off the ledge. I had a very good friend of mine who works at the hospital here talk me off the ledge right before my PET scan. Um, and so to have someone like you that would be able to guide, and I had so much support. Like, I had lots of friends who had breast cancer who connected me to people who had breast cancer and were able to, talk me through. And I went through all of the chemo, the bald head, the everything. And the chemo worked, but I, even though I had all of that support, to have a person like you navigating me through, like you do would have been very, very helpful. And so I'm so happy that we are talking about this because I never knew there were breast cancer coaches out there.
Yeah.
And
Well,
and I mean, and I know that they're not all created equal. And I know that it's important to find the right person who's going to guide you the right way. But when you talk about giving options for treatments, I didn't know I even had an option. I don't
mhm,
even know if I did have an option.
yeah.
I was just told you're going to have 6 weeks of chemotherapy and then your surgery and maybe radiation.
Mhm.
And I ended up having 5 weeks of chemo because I had developed this super rare anemia for a totally different situation of another tumor they found,
Mm.
which is a totally different story, a cascading thing that happened because,
Yeah.
but I had 5 rounds. And then I had my double mastectomy and reconstruction in New Orleans. And then I ended up not having to have radiation. So they had pulled a couple of lymph nodes and I was clear. But I am now very curious
Mhm.
what it could have been had I known if there were
Yeah.
options.
Well, and it's interesting, Jamie, to your point, there are a lot of health coaches out there, and there are folks that I will see online that say, they're a breast cancer coach or advocate or whatever, and I think the difference here is most of those women, like yourself, are breast cancer survivors and are talking them through the treatment when they're going through it, what to expect, all of those types of conversations, which are really helpful and valuable. But I think what sets me apart and the differentiator here, which makes my services so unique, is I'm taking it from the front end. It's all about empowering women with education to understand their diagnosis. And there's a real misconception out there that every cancer center is the same, and they're not. In my journeys on the industry side of things, not every cancer center has the same kind of equipment. Not every cancer center can offer the same modality. So, when I see women online comparing stories, well, my doctor did this and my doctor did that, and how come this and how come, I think that women really need to recognize they need to empower themselves and be bold, do some research, work with someone like me that can help guide you to the best place for you, depending on what you need. Great example here is typically a woman with breast conservation, right? She has her lumpectomy, and most women with a lumpectomy are going through 6 weeks of radiation. But did you know that there are some radiation facilities that offer IORT, intraoperative radiation therapy, which means they do the lumpectomy and then one zap of radiation in the OR, and then you're done.
What?
Yeah, so that's an option. There's a 5-day radiation option with a certain kind of equipment where they use hyperfractionation, is what they call it, with an HDR. They offer 5 days of radiation. There are some facilities, if you're very large breasted, women with really large breasts don't do good with radiation. They typically have a lot of skin issues and
Mhm.
burning. But did you know that being treated on a prone board, laying prone, meaning on your stomach with your breast hanging down, so the beam is focused there instead of on your chest, that is a great option. So again, there's all of these little nuances that women just don't know about because they're going to where their doctor sends them. They don't know that there's other options available. They're listening to what these doctors are saying and they're hanging on to every word. Most women do, to say, okay, whatever you think, this is what I'm going to do. But I'm here to say, if you want to be more informed, let's talk about it. And to me, it's Jamie. I look at the patient. It's the whole portrait. What's going on in their life, their family. How far away are they from these cancer centers? Travel time is huge, especially when you're taking time off work for radiation, for example. And as you know, being in this scope, and talking to women, most women are getting 6 weeks of radiation every day for 6 weeks. That's a burden of time, so is there another option for me? So having that knowledge, I think, could really help and guide women. while I also empower women, Jamie, with great questions to take to their what I call the circle of care team. It's their physicians. Let me arm you with great questions for your surgeon. Let me arm you with great questions for your radiation oncologist and your medical oncologist. And that way they're not missing anything. So we can talk about what's important to them. Okay, you take these questions, make sure these are all the questions that you ask, and then let's come together and talk to your family and then figure out what's best for you.
These are great. This is such great information because, you know, when I talk to people that I'm interviewing, we come up with questions together. And I feel like you have just practically answered all of the questions that I want to ask you. But I mean, there are more, but I mean, because, you know, we're talking about these misconceptions that people have, number one, and you know, about testing and detection and treatments. This I'm my mind is blown
Yeah.
because there are these things that I just don't know, and I feel like you are teaching me just in the small amount of time that we've been talking about things that I need to know. I'm,
Yeah.
you know, and other people need to know, and it's good for me because I can help other people through and connect them to you or, you know, whatever.
Mhm.
I just, yeah, I mean, this is just, and I learned that, you know, doctors that we have in our own areas are not the end all be all. Are they intelligent and know what they're doing and things like that? Absolutely, 100%. I mean, that they are where they are because, you know, what they've gone through, their education, their experience, and all of that. But what
Right.
I have found is that second opinions are a must,
Yes.
and I experienced that with a thymoma tumor that I had. It's not that they didn't recognize that it was a thymoma tumor because they did. I mean, I had it removed by a surgeon here in town, and but this rare anemia that I got because of that thymoma tumor is where I needed that second opinion. What drug can I be on to help my hemoglobin stay at a level? You know, it was just this, so second opinions, and also about breast surgery. So I did go for second opinion on breast surgery, and I ended up going with that second opinion because I wanted my own tissue for my breasts. Um, so I really thoroughly encourage people to do that. Um, Detection, this is also kind of a misunderstanding that people have of what kind of, you know, testing they need to be able to detect. Because, you know, when we talk about, oh yeah, you know, come here, we have free mammograms. Well, those are usually screenings, right? And that's what I used to get, is just a screening, until I finally found out I had dense breast tissue, and then they started doing diagnostics because they found two lumps. I've had two lumpectomies before my breast cancer.
Mhm.
So I started to go in and say, make sure that it is a diagnostics test. And so, what can you tell us about that? Like, what do women need to do to get the testing in order to detect the best way that they can?
Mhm. It's a great question, Jamie. You know, I think that first and foremost, when you're searching out where to go for your mammograms, um, just about everybody these days should have 3D tomo mammo. So that's a very sophisticated type of mammography equipment that they use for both screening and diagnostic mammograms. And what that is basically when you're in compression, the arm of mammography equipment kind of arcs. There's an arc where what they're doing is looking at the breast in slices, kind of like a CT scan. They're looking at it in slices. And what they're able to do here is be more specific, more detailed, more clarity on what they're seeing. And especially for women that are dense breast, it helps to bring a little bit more clarity to the mammograms. But if I were a woman and I was seeking out where do I go, and when I'm talking to my gynecologist or my PCP about a script, what I would say to that person that's writing that script, doctor, when you do my breast exam, do you agree that my breasts feel a little bit dense? Should we go ahead and just ask them to do a diagnostic mammogram with an ultrasound at the same time, just to help eliminate any back and forth callbacks? That's what I would do because, again, time time is time, right? And especially as a busy woman with a job and a family and all of these back and forth appointments, it can be a real pain. So I would have that conversation with your PCP or your GYN, whoever is writing that script, and ask them. Number one, if you're a diagnostic mammo is basically in that category is if you have a problem, if you're feeling something, if you have nipple discharge, if you have a strong family history, that's when you're going to get that diagnostic workup, which means they're not just going to do the 4 views and send you out the door. They're going to do the 4 views and they're going to look at everything. And then if they need to do additional views while you're there, they will do that. Along with the ultrasound in most situations. So again, it's seeking out the women's imaging centers, radiologist, the physicians that are reading the mammograms. You want them to be a dedicated mammographer, meaning it's a radiologist that specializes in reading women's imaging, right? And then again, just, asking your doctor about, my breasts are dense and can we go ahead and just add an ultrasound onto the order? That's what I would do.
So that is such great advice, and I tend to give that advice to all kinds of people. And I know that women's health is not, they're not all equal, for our population. And so some of those women might be told, well, we need to check with your insurance. So some people may not be able to afford to be able to do that. Do you
Right.
have any advice for that?
Well, just know that, if, especially in October when a lot of these healthcare systems promote screening mammograms for, X amount of dollars, no insurance, whatever the promotion is, I would just make sure and check what kind of equipment they have. And most of these places do have the latest and greatest mammography equipment. And trust when you go to those special pricing events or screening, whatever, you're getting a good quality image. Okay. But it's just not going to be read the same day, most likely by the radiologist. So just trust that you're getting good quality imaging. But I would just ask first how old is your equipment? Is this 3D Tomo Mammo? That's what I would ask. And most of
Okay.
these are offering that.
Okay, so October is such a pivotal and significant month for me. So I used to get my mammograms all the time in October, but I had to put it off at one point. I think because of COVID or something. I think it was COVID, and I had to wait, and so that's why now mine were started to be in June. But October is such a good month to put that on your calendar
Mm,
and get that mammogram every year, and then make sure that you are seeking out, where can I get a mammogram,
yeah,
without insurance, or if you don't have insurance, especially,
right.
and to be able to do that. So, okay,
And I
really
just
good information. Mhm.
Yeah, and I'll just add one more thing there, Jamie, because in social media, I've been seeing a lot of posts about breast ultrasound, no compression, doesn't hurt. Let me just say this: a breast ultrasound does not replace a mammogram. Okay, they work in conjunction with each other. So a mammogram, and again, it's all about early detection. And I hear women all the time saying, I'm not going, they compress too hard, it hurts. Let me just say this: compression is good. The harder they compress, the better the image, because you imagine a sponge, and when you smash a sponge down really, really thin, and you can see all of the pore, everything with more detail, right? So imagine your breast. It's so important. And these mammograms, Jamie, when when you talk about early detection, it's picking up a cancer that is the size of a grain of sand. That is the importance of mammography. So when we see or we hear about calcifications, calcifications could potentially give an indication that there could be something there. That's why they want to do extra views and potentially biopsy that area just to make sure that there's no malignancy. An ultrasound cannot find calcifications. An ultrasound is helpful if they see something on the mammogram that looks like a little nodule or a mass, or you feel a lump, the ultrasound helps determine, is this solid or cystic? Is it fluid filled or is it solid where we need to consider a biopsy? So I just want women to understand, don't just go for the ultrasound because that's not the best thing.
That is exactly what happened with me. I always do the mammogram and the ultrasound.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember going into my radiologist who was on duty that day. His name was Dr. McDonald, cute little old man, sweet, super sweet. And I knew, so I'm very familiar with looks on nurses'
Mm-hmm.
faces
Mm-hmm.
because I've seen it before. I've had 2 lumpectomies. And so I remember looking at the nurse going, she sees something. And I look at the thing as well. So I
Yeah.
could see that she was seeing something. And I remember when she came into the room and said, Dr. McDonald would like to see you. And I knew right away that there was something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went in there, of course, and he had these huge screens up, this little old man with these big screens. And he literally pointed out to me, he says, you have these calcifications over here. And he says, where we get concerned is when there are groupings of calcification. And then you have this associated mass. And I saw the mass, and that was the lump that I recall feeling underneath my left breast. And
Mm-hmm.
so that piece of advice, Tammy, is so, so important. And so thank you for bringing that in.
Mm-hmm.
I have actually had women say that they are afraid to go in and get a mammogram
Mm-hmm.
and that, it hurts and all this. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
But
Right.
if they
Not
can
that
detect, yeah, it's not that bad compared to what it could be.
bad.
Yeah. I mean, I remember I used to get really super dizzy, like lightheaded.
Yes.
And I'd have to sit down. Okay, if I can get headed because you're smashing my breasts, fine.
Right.
But I will put it out there that it doesn't harm your breast. It doesn't flatten your breast. It doesn't change anything. But it does kind of hurt for a second. But um, but the ultrasound and the mammogram together is definitely where it's at. Okay. So your services and your support that you provide, how does that work? Like what services do you provide for patients and what services do you provide for, physicians?
Yeah, so my services, are for patients, and if you go to the website breastcancercoach.com, first I want to mention that it's a HIPAA compliant dashboard. So, meaning if you go onto the website, there are 3 different packages. And if folks wanted to hire me to review the pathology and imaging reports with them, have a conversation of what this means, there's an hourly rate, and then there are packages available too. When I talk to physicians that I know that are in private practice, a lot of physicians see value in this and the fact that they spend time reviewing information with the patient. But you and I both know, Jamie, sometimes when a patient is sitting there in the office and they hear cancer and they're hearing everything the doctor is saying, it's almost like that teacher on Charlie Brown, right? It's like you're not digesting what's being said to you. And then you go home and now your head is spinning, and you're trying to piece everything together. A lot of surgeons that I've spoken to about how my services can help them say to me, you know what, Tammy, I think that every breast cancer patient that I see, I'm going to give them your information. And if they want to reach out to you as a coach, someone to guide them through everything that we just talked about and help them understand what all of this means, I think that that would be a great service. Because then that way, when the patient goes back to the doctor, now everything is digested. And now the next conversation they have with their physician is more meaningful because they've had time to process everything. And then the two of them can then decide, okay, all right, Mrs. Smith, I've processed all of this. I've talked to Tammy. We went through pathology. We talked about treatment options. Now this is what I'm thinking. So now they have these questions, right? That they can then bring back to their doctor. They have something in their mind of the direction that they want to go. And then together, the patient and their provider can figure out best next steps.
What a great service. I don't even I just remember, coming home, and I was very lucky because and I say I was lucky only because I was a little bit privileged because we have a radiologist friend of ours who works at the breast center here, and
Mm-hmm.
he literally was just at my retirement party a week prior, or
Mm-hmm.
not even a week, like a couple days prior, because I had
Yeah.
gotten my mammogram on that Tuesday.
Mm.
Um, and so when Dr. McDonald and I spoke, I specifically asked, "Can you please share these with my other radiologist friend?" And they did. And he is the one who looked at the images that day and called me that night, excuse me, and said that it is a 95% chance or more that you have breast cancer. So
Mm-hmm.
he was able to get me into my uh, biopsy about a week before
Mm-hmm.
they scheduled me. And
Yeah.
so privileged, I would say, absolutely, just because of who I knew. And
Right.
I know not everybody is in that boat. Um, so I had it that Friday.
Mm-hmm.
And then I found out 24 hours later. He said, "Do you want," because I was camping the next
Mm.
day, that day, actually, that going camping that day. He says,
Mm.
"Do you want to know in 24 hours, or do you want me to wait until Monday?" And I said, "I want to know in 24 hours." And so I did. So I was in a nice place with some friends of mine, sitting by the lake, and found out at 3:30 that afternoon. So yeah, so I was definitely lucky in that sense. But to have someone like you, because when you get breast cancer, you have all kinds of advice coming at you. I mean, it's like some that's super not helpful and some that really is helpful, but it's a lot of information. So to
Mm-hmm.
have somebody with your expertise coaching you through, that would have been very, very helpful.
Yeah, and I will say that with in my experience and knowing who's who, not just in Florida where I live, not just the southeast, but across the country. It's being able to help you find the best breast surgeon. And that's where it all starts. You definitely don't want to go to the same doctor that took out your husband's gallbladder. Let me just say that, okay? Because it didn't used to be recognized as a specialty, Jamie. Years ago and going back to the mid 90s, early 2000s, there weren't a lot of breast dedicated surgeons. There weren't a lot of breast dedicated surgical practices. And there's a lot of that now. So I will say that, a few of the women that I have been working with as of recent, I can just say this because it just makes my heart feel good that, there was this one elderly woman that lived in North Florida, and she was just determined that she had to go to a research institute for her cancer. And, I said, listen, there's a lot of really great surgeons closer to home. And if you would like for me to help get you an appointment. And I said, well, I'll just tell you, a couple names that I would say are really good. Um, so ironically, what we were able to do, Jamie, is this woman I was talking to on a Monday, I was able to get her an appointment with her surgeon on Thursday the same week. So I can't fast track all the time, but just depending on where you are, where you live, what you're looking for, there's a potential, that we would be able to expedite appointments because there are women, like I said earlier, they're waiting 3 or 4 weeks. And let me just say this. I have had surgeons tell me, Tammy, when a woman has an abnormal mammogram or a positive breast cancer, when they call the healthcare system, the institute in their local area or town, what's happening? They're going to centralized scheduling. They're not even calling, the phone call is not going to the surgeon's office anymore. In a lot of these health centers, it's going to centralized scheduling. And then whoever's picking up the phone is scheduling the appointment. And there's no sense of urgency. And I've heard this from physicians. They tell me this one-on-one. We need to do better. So there are a lot of these surgeons that I have great relationships with, that we text, hey, I've got this woman. What do you think? Oh, let me talk to my nurse. I'll give me her number. You know, so I'm just saying that there are ways that we can expedite things in some situations.
Right. And again, I'll go back to that privilege on for
Yeah.
my situation is that I was automatically connected to our top surgeon, breast surgeon here in our town, and also an oncologist in our town. And so I didn't even have to call centralized or anything. I was just immediately connected
Yeah,
because of who I knew.
right.
So it's not that I'm the only, I mean, there's other people can have that option. Other people can reach out to the right people, such as yourself, to be able to connect them to the right people at the right time,
Mhm.
and and things like that. And it's interesting that you talk about how breast surgery is not done well. I read a book early on, Dr. Beth Dupree. I don't know if you know
Oh,
who
I know
she
her
is.
well. I know her well.
Hi. Okay. So
No.
I would love to have her on my podcast sometime.
Yeah.
I read her book, and that is where actually, I had one of her best friends in Florida. Do you know Chantel? Um, she, uh, she's a travel agent there. Anyway, she's one of her best friends,
Okay.
and she gifted me that book. That
Oh,
book changed my whole perspective of a lot of things.
you know what? I'll say this, Jamie. This,
Sorry, sorry, I needed to. I'm hearing something in the background. So, and I'll have to cut that out. My Beth Dupree's book really changed a lot of perspective in my life because that is where I first found out that for the most part she was a general surgeon,
hmm
and she talked about her whole path getting into specifically breast surgery. And
dedicated.
then, yes, and then I found out that, and I've watched a lot of I've listened to podcasts that she's been on, I've listened to interviews, videos, and things like that. But then I found out that our surgeon here, who did not end up doing my mastectomy because we don't have the option. I had the deep flap surgery in New Orleans, and we don't have that option
Yep.
here in Reno. And it's the only reason I didn't go and have my mastectomy with her. So,
Mm-hmm.
but I did find out though that she was a general surgeon, I believe, and
Yep.
she is now dedicated to breast surgery. So
Yeah.
that's super important to know.
Yes. And, you know, Beth Dupree, when she was in medical school, again, there weren't fellowship programs for breast. So that's where there were a lot of surgeons like Dr. Dupree, who has that general surgery background, but then specializing in only breast. But now there are breast fellowship programs in surgical oncology. But yes, Dr. Dupree is one of my favorites. I've known her for many, many years. And, you know, and she is one, and I've listened to some of her interviews, and she says the exact same thing. You know, you have got to find the right surgeon for you. The other piece, and you touched on this earlier, Jamie, is the importance of second opinion. You know, and if they're a good doctor, good doctors honor second opinions. They want their patients to get a second opinion because they want their patients to feel really good about what they're doing. So yeah, Dr. Dupree is amazing. I love her.
That's exactly what Dr. Manas Chrysopoulos said.
Mm,
He said, if you go in and you tell your doctor that you're going to get a second opinion and they poo poo it,
yeah,
you need to turn around and walk away.
yeah,
And he says he actually tells his patients, please go get a second opinion. He says
yep,
because that's gonna benefit everyone in
yeah.
that the patient's going to go into surgery or treatment or whatever more compliant and more feeling better about it.
Mm-hmm. And
So
the other, mhm. Yeah. I was going to say the other piece of this, Jamie, is, you know, it's not just, you have to feel good with your doctor, right? And the way I see this, it's almost like as a patient, this is kind of an interview, you know? I want to make sure that we, you know, we have a good understanding of each other, and I feel really good with you, and you're really listening and understanding me and my needs as a patient. That is so important, you know, just like you say. And it's just not the surgery, it's the healing process. And then your surgeon is kind of your quarterback, so to speak, of where they're sending you for, you know, your treatments, the medical oncologist, the radiation oncologist, and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I would love to meet Dr. Dupree sometime. So just putting it out there.
Work
Like I just really loved her book. I loved how she talked about how she got into Reiki. And
Yeah.
I had been doing Reiki, and I
Mm,
love Reiki, and I love how she performs Reiki on her patients even when they're under. And
yeah.
it was just very, very fascinating to me. So I
Yeah.
still, everyone, I follow her on LinkedIn now. I'm a little bit starstruck because I just think
Yeah.
she's just amazing. And so I'm so glad to hear that you're friends with her.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So, um, I know. Oh, here's a really good one, and this is really interesting because I had a navigator at our hospital. So when I got diagnosed, I walked into the oncologist's office and they gave me a packet. I don't even know if I ever looked at that. Like
Mm,
it was so much information. And so I found out that there was a navigator at the hospital. Um, and I know that when I asked questions about certain things, I would get an email with a ton of stuff, like a shit ton of stuff. Sorry. I just like, it was so overwhelming.
yeah.
And so many hospital systems have one of those breast navigators. How do
Mhm.
your services compare to those offered by the hospital system? And I'm so glad that hospital systems have them. And I just
Mhm.
found out that my cancer center just got a navigator, I think earlier on this year. But how do your services compare to that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. When you think about some of the healthcare centers that do have navigators, and then some, they have breast navigators that, are breast cancer focused, and navigators and other, solid tumor types. But the difference here, Jamie, is the navigator that you're seeing at the hospital, and I hope I don't offend anyone, but I'm just going to say it, because I've had a lot of interaction across the country with navigators. They're great at what they do and what they're able to do, right? So they're very kind of scripted to what the hospital has to offer and what the hospital, um, literature and materials that they're allowed to review with them, right? So I think the difference here is my approach is unbiased. I'm giving you information of what to look for in a cancer center. Again, like we were saying earlier, radiation facilities, they're not all set up the same. When you go to a navigator at a hospital that might have outdated equipment, you think they're going to talk about IORT or 5-day radiation. No, they're not going to, because they don't offer those services. They're awesome in what they're able to do at their institution. Most of the time, Jamie, the navigators at the hospital systems are basically kind of playing traffic cop. They're directing them to the different appointments and setting those up and helping them navigate the appointments, not necessarily navigating their care and treatment options.
Well, like I've heard from a couple of people that I've interviewed, especially like Dr. Crisopolo. I just love him because he said some things to me. I'm like, yes, exactly. He
Mm-hmm.
says, it may not be PC to talk about these things. And I'm like, thank you for talking about things that are not PC or
Yeah,
considered to be PC.
yeah.
We need to know that. And I recognize now, um, the materials that I was being sent. And I feel like you have such a personal touch too. And like you said, non-biased, and you are able to let people know what other options are out there
Right.
because, I mean, and the hospitals can only give the kind of information that they offer. And they're not going to tell you, they're not going to sit down and say, look, this is the only thing that we do. But if you go to, Mayo Clinic or wherever, they can talk to you about another option that
Mhm.
we don't offer here. Of course, they're not going to say that, right? Um, but there are some doctors I do know out there who actually will sit down with you and say, we don't do that here, but I
Mhm.
can sit down and talk to you about options for you to go get a second opinion to do what's best for your body. Yeah. Wow.
Exactly.
Mind
And
blow.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. There are a lot of really great doctors out there that spend the time and have these very deep conversations. Not everyone is like that, right? Um, but I feel like, if I were to sit down with a woman, number one, it's, where do you live? How far away? Again, it's just asking all of these very intricate questions about not just their cancer, but about the patient, because if someone, lives in the very rural community and it's 2 hours to get to a cancer center, I'm going to start researching for this woman, places that might have more updated equipment that could offer her, a more condensed treatment option. So she's not going back and forth every day for 6 weeks. That's an example. So, there's just a lot of behind the scenes things that I would do to help guide women dependent on what their needs are. And again, I can't stress it enough. Breast cancer is not a cookie cutter process. And every cancer center is not the same. So, it's just all about being able to have that conversation up front. And like you say, with the physician that you talk to, we all try to be PC, but I feel like I'm in a position where I don't have to be PC. I feel like if I'm going to say I'm just speaking truth. I'm speaking truth. And I'm saying these things to help women understand that there are options for them. And you don't have to just go to one place. Do a little bit of research. And if you want to research it on your own, that's great, but if you want to tap into a resource like me that's very tapped in. And the other piece, Jamie, it's, and you as a patient, it's understanding the healthcare system and the ins and the outs. One of the patients I was talking to, elderly woman in her 80s, she just didn't understand. Why do I have to set up an hour an appointment? Why this, why that, and then this, and then that? Okay, this is why, you're diagnosed with, and then just, this is the diagnosis. You need to have conversations. It's just helping them to understand. And then in the meantime, with some of these patients that are just so anxious, they're pulling in their family members. Their family members are getting all worked up. It's like, just let me be that bridge in between. Let me help take a little bit of the stress off of the family to work with the family member that's been diagnosed, to help them relax, help them to have a better understanding of things, which in turn will make your life a lot easier, in the long run. I know as a daughter, it's like taking my mom, my grandma, to doctor's appointments, and as that caregiver or that go-to family member that everybody goes to, you carry a lot of that weight. And sometimes it's not necessary when there's a resource out there to help you.
One of the things that just popped in my mind about breast cancer is when you get breast cancer, it's not just about the physical breast cancer. There's a lot of, mental,
Mm-hmm.
um, well-being that we need to take care of ourselves. I would imagine that your services sort of encompass that as well. And we'll go back to Dr. Dupree because this is one thing that I love about her as well, is she's all about that holistic healing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just about, and so the fact that you get to know these patients
Mm-hmm.
and you understand their lives and you probably have a good understanding of how you can help them mentally. Do your services have extend to that?
Well, I'm not a licensed therapist. I don't claim to be, but I do have a medical director, a breast surgical oncologist, Dr. Olga Ivanov, who is my medical director for Breast Cancer Coach. And she is available to talk to patients if they want to have a conversation with her. And she is very tapped into integrative approaches if patients want to learn a little bit more about that. She's not a second opinion, it's tapping into her for educational purposes only. So we have between her and I just a lot of resources. It's a nutritionist that we can direct people to that specialize in breast cancer or cancer nutrition in general. When women are going through chemo, things are different. Your body needs different nutrients. And then just the healing piece of it all. Just like you say, once you've gone through your cancer surgery, your treatment, and now you're on the road to recovery, now it's all about survivorship. And Jamie, it's just being able to connect the dots. Depending on what the patient needs, we have resources that we can direct them to whatever it is they're seeking out, for sure.
Yeah, so in my survivorship, I'm struggling. Like
Mhm.
the healing process, a lot of people think, oh, you should, you on with your life, and everything should be honky dory, back to normal, all this stuff. And that is just not the reality. And
Mhm.
I am 10 months out from my breast surgery. And when I found out that I was cancer free, and I am still struggling. And there are times where I feel like I'm doing good, and I know that I'm doing good as far as what I'm doing with this podcast and talking to folks like you, because I know
Mhm.
that I am helping other people. And that makes my heart really happy, that because that's part of my healing and I know that it's helping them. But boy, oh
Yeah.
boy, this October, when I said that it was a very, very significant and pivotal month for me, number one, my mother died 4 years ago, just this last Friday, October 6th. I struggle with that every year. This year seemed to be, it just seemed to be even more overwhelming. And it's breast cancer awareness month. So that's another layer because now I'm a breast cancer survivor. It's my birthday month. My birthday's next Monday, the 16th.
Mhm.
And it's fall. It's my favorite season of the whole entire year. It was my mom's favorite season. And I am just super struggling. And sometimes there are people who are wondering why I'm being the way that I am or feeling the way that I am. Can you speak to that? I know that you've never been a breast cancer patient, and that is, to me, is neither here nor there right now. You probably have an understanding of other survivors and what they've been through. What can we do? Like, what? This is
Yeah.
hard.
It is very hard. Throughout my career, I've, volunteered and have done led support groups and things like that. And one of the things that I've just started this week, Jamie, is a virtual support group. And I personally, and to your point, I'm not a breast cancer survivor, but I sense things, and one of those things is social media is a great outlet, um, but also at the same time, I feel like there's a disconnection, especially when we're on social media for support groups, typing posts and texting, chatting, chat groups. It's good for some, but so much gets lost in translation. So I started a support group. I do 2 nights. One night is for early stage breast cancer with radiation, and the other night is for advanced, for women that have gone through chemo. And the women are super excited about it because they want to just be able to talk, hear the voice, see your face. Let's just talk and share. And sometimes I feel like just having these conversations is a good release. Having a conversation about how you're feeling to your doctor, and maybe finding someone, a professional, just to talk to, is also something that folks should consider. But honestly, I feel like that over the years, over the last 3 years, support groups in person have just kind of gone away. And I feel like that, if I could offer something online over Zoom, I think it's a way to kind of bring people back together, to hear the voices and to see the faces and feel connected. And I don't know from your experience, Jamie, and what you're struggling with, but if you feel like that could be helpful to some women that are struggling, having those live discussions.
Uh, I'm sure it will be helpful. I'm a very open person. I go to therapy. I've been going to therapy
Hmm.
um, ever since my diagnosis. I have a wonderful therapist. I actually interviewed her on my podcast earlier on because I think it's so important for people to have someone that they can connect with. And I know that people go through marital problems because of diagnosis, and some people make it and some people don't. I know the percentage is pretty high of people who split up, and that's so unfortunate. And I really feel like therapy for couples, my husband and I go to therapy. We have been since last February because he wasn't understanding why I was struggling so much, and I was having a hard time understanding, and it was causing this friction. And so we started going to therapy, which has been a really good thing. So um I am open to that kind of stuff. I don't know. It's hard to pinpoint some of the things that I am struggling with. I just am not the same person that I was. My thought process is different. I'm very sensitive towards certain things. And when people don't understand that, and you don't want to be completely honest with them because that might be hurtful, and I don't want to hurt people. And so I've really tightened up my friend group. We just lost a cancer patient friend of ours just yesterday morning. It's very difficult because we were all in a support group together on it was Facebook Messenger. We are called the Badass Warrior Queens. And
Mm-hmm.
she lost her battle. She didn't have breast cancer, but I don't know if it started there or what. But anyway, it metastasized to her brain, and she ended up passing away yesterday. That rocked my world. And,
So
you know,
sorry. Yeah.
yeah.
So sorry. It's tough. And Jamie, I'm starting to read and see more about survivorship in PTSD.
Mhm.
There's a correlation there as far as women or just people in general going through cancer. But I'm just gonna say, when you think about a woman going through breast cancer, and the woman is, the matriarch of the family, we're supposed to hold our shit together for everybody, and that's really tough. But at the same time, we have to recognize that it's okay to rest. It's okay to listen to your body. It's okay to delegate, to friends or family members. And it's okay to say no,
Yeah.
and that's the tough part. And, you know, when we are in that mindset, or we have that mask or that hat on where we're just go, go, go all the time, and all of these things that we need to accomplish, and then all of a sudden it hits us like a ton of bricks, a diagnosis like breast cancer, it's debilitating. And then, like you say, everybody says, okay, well, you're done 3 years out. But no, it still hangs over your head.
Yeah.
And just, yeah, I'm really
You
sorry,
mentioned
that.
you mentioned PTSD, and I really think that that's what I'm going through, because what happens is especially if you're on social media, you start seeing memories that pop up. And I see myself with my bald head last year. I was right in the throes of chemo at that time. And all I want is my mom to be here. Like my mom would have, she was always very comforting, and she was the one that held that family together. And our family is very different now. And that's very painful.
Mhm.
And trying to get used to that. And but anyway, okay, we need to wrap this up. I do want to say, number one, how can people make an appointment with you? They can go to to your website, breast cancer coach website.
Yep.
And then I imagine there's a little thing on there that they can click on and make an appointment with you.
Yep. So if you go to the website, breastcancercoach.com, and I encourage you to go there. If you message me DM on social media, on Instagram, it's Breast Cancer Coach 2023. And then on Facebook, it's Tammy Marcotte, Marcotte, and we'll put that in the notes, Breast Cancer Coach. But I encourage you to go to the website, because the website allows you to message me by hitting the blue button, and then everything there is HIPAA secure. And if we start there, it just gives us a nice kind of a file, so to speak, where if you wanted to share your pathology report or imaging or something with me, it's HIPAA compliant and secure that way. So I think that is the best way. But let me just say this, Jamie, I have it set up where it's a free complimentary 15-minute meet the coach. So pick up the phone, let's have a conversation. We can do it over Zoom, hear each other's voices, talk it through, and let me share with you, what my services are, how my medical director is involved, first it's trying to find out what your needs are and then kind of figure out what is the best way for us to work together. So yeah, it's breastcancercoach.com.
Okay. Yeah. Well, the first time I spoke to you on the phone, I felt a very warm, just a warm personality. You're very down to earth. And obviously through this podcast, people can tell, how caring you are and how knowledgeable you are. And so I just really appreciate that. I know you had mentioned that for people to listen to their bodies. That's always one of my pieces of advice for people who have never been diagnosed yet. Um, to listen to their bodies. I had a lump. I had some things that were happening that I felt in hindsight,
Mhm.
and I always get a mammogram. And so I know I do listen to my body. What is one major piece of advice that you have for people who have not been diagnosed yet, or even who have just been diagnosed?
So, for those women who have no history of breast cancer, it's important to stay up to date on your yearly screening. So, as everybody knows, cancer guidelines have changed mammograms to now it's yearly at age 40. So, get your mammograms at age 40 every year. It's also important. I'm an advocate to breast self examination. I know that there are some people out there that say, don't do it. But you know what? You know your body better than anyone else. And my recommendation, and I used to teach this, American Cancer Society, when I used to do breast self exam classes, it's do it every month, the same time every month. After your period, not during that time of month where you're ovulating, because our breasts are lumpy, bumpy anyway, right? So do it after your cycle, the same time every month. And it's key to understand that when you do your breast self examination, you're going to go around the breast, and I can put information on the website or on my social pages. But the key here is if you feel something and you say, wonder what that is, check the opposite breast in the same area. And if that feels the same, then that's your normal tissue. But if it feels different, then that's something you need to pay attention to. Okay. On the other hand, if you are a woman that's been recently diagnosed with breast cancer, knowledge is power. Knowledge is power. You have to be your own advocate. I say this all the time, be bold and be fierce, and don't be afraid to hurt anybody's feelings, right? Because this is your body, this is your cancer, this is your operation and your treatment decisions. So it's like I said, it's not cookie cutter, but you need to empower yourself with the education to help guide you to the best treatment decision for you. And it's all about you.
I love all of that. Thank you so much, Tammy. This has been such an amazing conversation. And I want to remind my audience that I have a private Facebook group. It's very private. It's called Test Those Breasts Podcast. And there's some questions that people have to answer to get in. And I would love to have you come on live with me one of these nights very soon so that we can have an intimate conversation, together with my audience. So let's talk about that. And with that, thank you again for your expertise. Thank you for the connection. And I just want to tell my audience, thank you so much for listening. And we will see you all next time on the next episode of Test Those Breasts.
Thank you so much, Jamie. Yay. Thank you. That was awesome. I could cry.
I know.